medical, traditional medical society, if you will, has taught me what to do, and it didn't lead to healing for me. In fact, it led to quite the opposite. So it's put me into this whole world of health and wellness and health coaching so that I can help other people that aren't getting the healing that they need or that they're looking for through traditional methods. So that's why I'm here. And yes, I'm realistic. I have 2 kids too. They're not, they don't really have health issues, but they struggle with day-to-day issues just like everybody else. That things we're going to talk about tonight that can help your kids that maybe aren't dealing with health issues, but just ways to help them function better at school, ways to help optimize their brain function for school, but also those kids, this information is going to apply to those kids that are struggling at school as well. So let's get started. I'm calling it Healthy Bodies, Healthy Brains because, yes, they're related for sure. And a lot of people don't really relate school performance to nutrition, but I think that they're very intimately related, and some of these things that I have posted up here may indicate that. French fries are the most common vegetable source for kids today. Soft drinks, most 8 to 12-year-olds drink soft drinks daily, and each 12-ounce serving is 9 teaspoons of sugar. And that phosphorus that are in soft drinks can leach calcium out of bones. And interestingly enough, a lot of this information I'm talking about for kids applies to us too, as adults. Junk food, 25% of calories on a typical school day comes from junk food. I've seen what's in the bar or the whatever they call it, the cafe, or what do they call it, the cafe where you can pick stuff that you want, a la carte, thank you, at the high school, and a lot of that is considered junk food, I think. Hot dogs, cookies, and rolls are among the top 10 sources of food for infants and toddlers 4 to 24 months of age. So something to make you think and say, And hidden sugars. So the top 4 things on this list won't surprise you as having sugar in them. Ice cream, cake, Hershey bar, sugar cookies. But do we think as ketchup as being 29% sugar, as fruit flavored yogurt? A lot of us think we're doing good by giving our kids yogurt because it has good bacteria in there, but a lot of it's really heavy in sugar, 14% sugar. I think that's probably on the low end for some of them that are out there that I've seen. Shake and bake, I don't even know if that's even around anymore, but that's 51% sugar, carbohydrates. Peanut butter, read your labels, a lot of the peanut butter. Peanut butter, I'm not really down on peanut butter. Peanut butter can be a good source of nutrition, protein for our kids, but look at the label and see a lot of it they put extra sugar in that isn't necessary. And there are peanut butters out there that are good sources that are non-GMO that don't have that extra sugar in them. So definitely read your labels. Let me click through this. Sugar in cereals. This is one of my favorites because a lot of our kids start their day with cereal. Honey Smacks, Apple Jacks, Fruit Loops, Cocoa Puffs are 50 to 60% sugar. And some of those ones that are not as much favored by children are down here on the bottom. Weenies and Cheerios. I know our kids are eating those bran flakes every morning. Again, those have less sugar in them, but they're still, they have some fiber in there probably to counteract it, but still not a great source of nutrition for our kids for sure. So why is sugar bad? Sugar displaces key nutrients. So it takes our body extra work to process that sugar. Our body doesn't know what processed sugar is. It's not a sugar that God created. Our body knows what to do with an apple. That's, sugar that God created. It knows what to do with honey even. But it doesn't know what to do with processed sugar. So it takes extra vitamins to process that sugar. Key things like B vitamins, which are the happy vitamin. So when we're using up those extra nutrients, our kids are suffering from it. So it can cause hyperactivity and irritability, not a big shock there, but due to blood sugar swings. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later too, but you're eating that sugar and then the kids' blood sugars will spike and then it'll drop soon thereafter. So they're going through periods of hyperglycemia and then hypoglycemia, whether they're diabetic or not, and they're not balancing out their blood sugar. So you're seeing it in their mood definitely throughout the day. Reducing attention span, and it lowers your immune system's ability to fight off disease and illness. My daughter, bless her heart, she's in college and she's got a really bad cold. And so she messaged me yesterday and says, I know, no sugar, no dairy. She knows the drill. So sugar, going out, when you have a cold, the thing you want to do is go get a smoothie or something from Culver's, right? That's the thing that's going to ease your throat. But that dairy is going to create extra mucus, and the sugar is going to lower your immune system, and you're going to feel a lot worse afterwards instead of better. And did you know? So we were just talking about this right before this conversation started about food allergies and sensitivities. So we've all heard of IgE food allergies. That's the kids that are allergic to peanuts or allergic to dairy and have anaphylactic reactions from them. They're the ones that have to carry the EpiPens. My daughter sits next to a child at school that she can't even, my daughter can't have anything that's peanut related sitting next to her at the high school because if she breathes it, she can have an anaphylactic reaction. So those are the IgE reactions that we've heard about. IgG reactions are delayed reactions. So these are the ones we don't hear as much about, and stay tuned because we may be offering that in the near future here at the office with some IgG food sensitivity testing. Super excited about that. But these ones are the ones that are more commonly heard of, but they can be any type of food. They can be chicken, they can be berries, they can be eggs, any type of food. And the reactions that you can have from these, or that our children can have from these, can be recurrent ear infections. They can be headaches, they can be sneezing, stuffy nose, chronic cough. So these are our kids that are often complaining about gut issues, but they may not. They may just have symptoms that show up and you don't realize that it's associated with a food because they're eating that food on a regular basis, and the reaction may not appear until the next day. So you don't look and think about it and say, oh, they had eggs and they're, getting persistent colds. You don't put the two together necessarily. So IgG food sensitivity testing, if it's necessary or if it's appropriate for your child, may be something that to consider for sure. And poor health starts in the digestive tract. With all of my health coaching clients, we always start in the gut. That's where our health originates, is in the gut. And things that can damage the digestive tract are those food sensitivities that I was talking about. Gluten being a big one for sure. It's a gut irritant. It's one that a lot of people don't like to talk about because it's really hard to take out of our kids' diets. I have one that's in denial about her gluten sensitivity, so it's really hard to pull it out, right? It's in pizza, it's in all the carbs that they eat, it's in pasta. But I'm here to tell you it is possible, and most of our parents notice a big difference when they pull that out for sure. Poor diet, processed foods, obviously, bad bacteria or yeast. Being on frequent antibiotics changes the gut flora of our children, changes our gut flora. For people that were on antibiotics a lot as a children, going into adulthood, it changes, your gut flora. So, something to be aware of. And I talk about it over here that more than 95% of autistic kids have gastrointestinal dysfunction. Testing for those bad bacteria, those yeast, is something that we're starting to offer here now as well. It's called GI mapping. So especially for those autistic kids, that's something that we can do and run a GI map, and it looks for those types of infections. It looks for bacteria, it looks for yeast, it looks for fungal overgrowth, parasites, all types of things. Really helpful information to have. And stress can damage the digestive tract as well. And again, the effects of the damaged digestive tract include weakened immune system, inflammation, and those brain behavior disorders. So what can we do to support our child's immune system? Rest is really important. It's one of the key things that we can do for our kids. So much healing happens overnight when they're sleeping. So really important to get enough sleep. Exercise is really important. Regular chiropractic adjustments, obviously, to help support their immune system. Making sure they're in an additive and toxin-free environment. So we can't control that outside of the house, obviously, but there's a lot that we can look at in our own home to make sure that we're pulling those toxins out of our house. Making sure that they get the nutrients they need through their food, and if their regular diet is deficient in nutrients, then supplementing with a good quality multivitamin is good. I call it nutritional insurance for sure. Beneficial bacteria in the gut. So if their immune system is off from flora or from being on a lot of antibiotics, supplementing with a good probiotic or probiotic food is a good idea as well. And anti-inflammatory omega-3s. I'm going to kind of hit home that point home here in a little bit. And a healthy diet, including real food. And things to avoid: stress, obviously, depletes those critical B vitamins. It raises those cortisol levels. I know. How do you avoid or limit stress?
A whole other class.
Yeah, that's a different class. Long-term stress, it raises cortisol levels, so it causes chronic inflammation, even in our kids. So ways to manage that, again, like you said, a whole different class, but try our best to do that. Processed sugar, artificial sugars, refined carbs, good things to pull out of the diet. And pro-inflammatory omega-6s. So Another test we do here compares omega-6 levels to omega-3 levels in your bodies at the cellular level. Omega-6s can be pro-inflammatory, omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. Most of us, per the testing that we've done here, have plenty of high levels of omega-6s in our diet. A lot of those things are coming from fast food. They're frying their foods in the corn oils, the vegetable oils, the soybean oils, sunflower oils. So we can definitely limit that at home too with what we're cooking with and using a healthy source of fat as opposed to these fats here. So what about protein? So my favorite mantra for my clients is fat, fiber, protein. So you need to have those combination of foods to help stabilize blood sugar throughout the day. And by fat, I mean healthy sources of fat. So avocados, coconut oil, nuts, seeds, things like that. The fiber, the carbohydrate digestion actually begins in your mouth. So if you've ever put a piece of white bread in your mouth and not chewed it, you'll realize it'll start to dissolve in your mouth. That's from the enzyme release in your mouth. So carbohydrate digestion begins in your mouth. Protein digestion begins in your stomach. And fat digestion begins in your small intestine. So if you eat a combination of those three things, it helps to stabilize your blood sugar. It keeps you full longer. This again is for adults as well as kids. It helps to supply energy throughout the day and helps keeping you feel full throughout the day so that you're not constantly reaching for the next sugar fix. I call it sugar roller coaster, so to speak. I think that's everything on that slide. I kind of went off cue here. Yeah. So this is something that my one daughter does deal with, is hypoglycemia. She deals with this on a regular basis. So she knows that she has to keep something with her if she has a crash in the morning. But she also discovered that when she had cereal in the morning every day, she was hungry half an hour later and didn't have lunch for 4 more hours after she got to school. Mm-hmm. So she switched over quite a long time ago to a protein shake in the morning. And that combination has kept her full throughout lunch, because her lunch some days, it used to be 1 o'clock. I know in middle school, I think now it's 12 or 12:30. But we send our kids off to school. Sometimes they have breakfast at 7 o'clock in the morning. They don't have lunch until 12 or 12:30. That's a long time to go without eating. So that breakfast is really critical to make sure they get that combination of a good source of protein, some fat and some fiber in there. And then again with lunch, a lot of our kids have activities after school or sports after school. So they're going to, volleyball lesson or volleyball whatever after school and not having eaten since noon and then expected to have all this energy, to practice. So this is really important. Omega-3s, one of my favorite supplements, especially with kids. Consumption of omega-3 rich foods and supplements, especially DHA and EPA, which are two of the components that are really important in omega-3s, can have short and long-term benefits on the life of a child. So the best sources come from seafood and purified fish oil supplements. So whose kids are sitting at home all day eating herring and salmon and sardines? Not many of them. So omega-3s are really important to supplement. We actually have some here tonight if you want to test them and try them. We've got a liquid form of it that's really quite tasty. But these are some of the studies that are out there, and if you Google omega-3 and brain health or kids health, you're going to find all kinds of stuff. These are just a few of the things that I found. There's actually another slide because I found so many good things. Mothers who had high levels of DHA had babies with better sleep patterns. Girls of mothers on omega-3 during pregnancy had less risk of developing breast cancer tumors. I just read something about that recently. Pregnant women susceptible to hay fever, asthma, allergies, when they consumed omega-3, had less a risk of developing these or other allergies. And this was a good one. The omega-3 benefits for children are significant when they are breastfed during their first year, because then later on in life, those kids can have fewer symptoms of obesity, hypertension, insulin resistance, and all of those good things, diabetes, asthma, that are becoming more and more popular in our country right now. So this is one of the products that we have here, the liquid product. Clinical studies have found that children who have been given a balanced omega-3 supplement for 13 weeks showed improvement in their ADHD symptoms. Drina was talking about easing the burden on our kids for sure, and easing that burden through making sure they get good nutrition is really vitally important as well, and this is one of the ways that we can do that. And there's also a study that showed a group of autistic children, when given fish oil supplements for 6 months, had better sleep patterns, better cognitive skills, reduced hyperactivity, And there's even a small study that found it can help alleviate symptoms of depression in children as well. And again, a lot of these things go for adults as well as kids. So just to summarize, the best that we can, it's important to eat an anti-inflammatory diet as close to nature as possible, as close to the foods as God gave us as possible, with plenty of colorful fruits and vegetables. Including probiotic foods or supplement is important for GI health. Reducing or eliminating processed sugars as best as possible, again, for optimal immune health. And including good sources of omega-3s for healthy brains. And my favorite mantra, fat, fiber, protein for balanced blood sugars. Excuse me. And being aware of those food allergies and sensitivities, and if appropriate, testing for those things. And if appropriate, testing for other opportunistic bacteria that might be present as well. Encouraging plenty of rest, exercise, and stress reduction. Some of these, again, difficult to do, but as best as possible. And adding a good quality vitamin supplement to assure that your children are getting the nutritional support that they need. Thank you.
I want to talk about.
Okay, the way I see it, my
Yeah.
husband is here,
Yeah.
that they can contact.
Thank you. Yes.
Couldn't be with all of you.
Super quick on the GI mapping. I knew nothing about GI mapping. My autistic parents taught me what GI mapping was. And here's how I learned about it. I had a mom of 2 autistic boys tell me that they were about ready to take out a second mortgage on their house to do GI mapping because they found a gentleman in California who would do it for $23,000 each. So I said to Carrie, what in the world is GI mapping? Do you know anything about it? And we set to work very quickly to figure out what it was. And quickly figured out that it was something that we could do easily from here. So the world of things that are happening in autistic kids is sometimes crazy to me. Yeah. So we are now, that's why we work to do that. But we've seen some pretty amazing things already in the few people that we've done GI mapping in. And I have not memorized my talk, so if the internet crashes, we are all in big trouble. So, no, I'm just kidding. That storm was coming and I thought, oh no. The food allergy testing I'm going to do myself is the very first thing, because crazy things. Like, I'm pretty sure my body doesn't like grapes, even though I think it should. But makes me feel bad. So, anyway, it's just a matter of figuring out what's best for your body. We're trying to figure out the best ways to do that. We're going to do the chiropractic part of things. One of the things I just want to stress, you all are patients here and you know this, but chiropractic is all about the brain and nervous system. It has very little to do with your spine, so we are going to talk nothing about the spine. We're going to talk about the brain and nervous system because that's really, really what we do. So nobody talks about the brain. I know in school what I learned about was how our heart works, right? And that was the most important organ in your body. But when you figure out that your brain tells everything in your body what to do, your brain is by far the most important organ that you have. And it does everything. So when we're talking about learning and things like that, large portion of our brain that controls learning, when Drina was talking about things like some kids learn great, but what they can't do is socially be at school, our brain controls that. It controls how we interpret our environment. So when we look at things like sensory disorders and those kinds of things, all of those things are brain related. When we look at chiropractic, we work specifically then with the nervous system. So we have our brain up here, all of the nerves come out of our brain and go to our whole body. And there's communication that happens then between what's happening in our brain. So our brain knows what to do. It sends a signal out to our body to tell our body what to do, and our body sends a signal back to tell our brain that it did what it wanted us to do, okay? Here's where things get messed up. We live in a world that our body constantly takes on stresses, right? So those stresses could be physical things. We all know what those things are. I challenge you to spend a day with a 3-year-old and do what they do all day long if you believe that your kids have not had any physical trauma, right? So crazy things like there was a study that said we fall 6,000 times just learning how to walk, all right? Those things had an impact on our body. Huge research that shows being born had an impact on our body. There's research out that shows that the average child, as they're being born, the doctor puts 90 to 120 pounds of pressure on their neck by pulling on their head. Okay? If you think about that, that's like holding your child by their head and hanging a 90-pound person off their feet. You would never do that. People will say even my kids were born C-section, so none of that happened to them, which makes me think people think their kids were born C-section, were born like this, right? Ta-da! They were not. It's the same thing, right? There's a lot of stress that happens to your nervous system just from being born, and just the regular things that we do. And then we meet people every day who, on top of what I would call those regular childhood things, have crazy things like driving a dirt bike into the side of a building, right? Or we live in northern Illinois, so I had to fall out of a hay mound when I was 5, but it didn't hurt me at all. My mom just said, I had this huge lump on my head for a week, but then I was fine. But all of those impacts have an effect on our nervous system, so that now that great communication that should be there starts to get a little bit of interference in it. Not always things that we see firsthand. Carrie talked about chemical stuff in our food, right? I completely agree with her. The closer we can get back to food that God made, the better, because it doesn't have all of those chemicals in it. Years ago, I adjusted a guy that was responsible for the municipal water sources in 3 local communities. And I stopped him one day because I like to know how things work. And I was reading all these studies about water, whether it came out of a bottle or out of our tap or wherever it came from. And I said, Tom, what's really in our water? And he said, oh, Dr. Heather, you don't want to know what's in the water. And I said, I really do, because I talk about it and I see it as a huge stress to our body. And he said, if you knew, you'd never drink water again. Because there's so many things now, even things like they're finding antidepressants in most of our waters, which at first made me say, what? How in the world did that even happen? What they're finding is when people take antidepressants, our bodies break those antidepressants down into tiny little particles, that there isn't a filter in the world that can filter those out. So now, because of the amount of antidepressants that have been put into our water system, there's antidepressants in most bottled waters and most tap waters because of that process. Those are just the things that they've looked at. I agree with Carrie. There's things just we can't get away from, that are going to be there, that our body is going to be stressed by, whether we like it or not. Drugs, whether they're there's things that we need to do to our body at times, but we believe if there's things that we can do to help your body work better so you need less of those medications, that's a better thing. I put vaccines on this list. I am not going to tell you that I fully believe that vaccines are the root of all the evils that we see in autistic kids and things like that, but I will tell you there seems to be a tendency there that I think we need to look at. And I talk to mamas every day who saw it firsthand in their own kids. Like Drina said, you know your kids. So, if there's already some tendencies there, it's a conversation worth having about how you're going to do that. The emotional stuff is huge. If you don't know, I have 5 kids. I have 4 teenagers. I have an 8-year-old who thinks he's a teenager. The amount of emotional stress that I see my kids have is so much different than I experienced myself. But social media I don't even know what to do with it. And our original thought process was just keep our kids off of it. Well, just so you know, that didn't work. But there's just so much stress there and so many things that I'm seeing them deal with day in and day out. When we take all of those factors, chiropractic's talked since the beginning about what they call the 3 T's, which are thoughts, traumas, toxins. When you take all of those things and they really start to affect your nervous system, we see an outcome from that. We see a great brain up here that should be working the way that it should, that now has taken on all of those stresses. We see a great nervous system that now starts to not function the way that it should. And what happens is there's just interference in that. So here's our brain trying to tell our body what to do. It's trying to do what it needs to do, and we start to show symptoms. In us, that looks one way, right? The symptoms that we see in adults, or the symptoms that adults think they see, are pain related, right? Or definite symptoms that we can put our finger on. Here's the difference in our kids. Girls don't develop the nerves that feel long-term pain until they're 15 years old. Boys don't develop those nerves until they're 18 years old. So a lot of the behavioral things that we see in kids, a lot of the emotional things that we see in kids are actually because their nervous systems are so messed up, but they can't say to us that that's the symptom that they're having. So parents don't act because they're not saying that they're hurting, right? Parts of those things, though, that I think we see sometimes are because really their body is still responding to that damage. It's just responding in a different way. I think of when you go to the dentist and you don't feel any of the pain, but you know how lousy you feel for the entire rest of the day. Your body still experienced all of that. It just didn't experience it in a painful way. So we see kids that deal with things that I would put in two categories when that starts to happen. We see when kids have tons of stresses and their nervous systems get messed up. I see kids that do what I call underreact, right? So here, I will give you my interpretation. Amy's seen it before, but kids that are in that state when they encounter a stress, whatever it is, go just like this, right? It's complete shutdown. At school, what that means is I am stressed out and no information is going in whatsoever. I see more girls that fall into this category. To me, it's a little bit of a scarier group because here's what's happening. They're like this. What the teacher sees is a child that's sitting there very quietly, right? But what ends up happening is no information is going in whatsoever because their brain and their nervous system has literally just shut itself off, okay? The other side that we see to that is now we see a nervous system that's in complete overreaction. So when we look at things like sensory disorders, these are nervous systems that are so irritated from all the stresses that they've encountered that normal sensory things now are completely overloading them, right? Normal noises, normal things that we can deal with. It's like your nervous system is on red alert. So it's constantly going, what is that? What's the matter, right? So we see those ADHD things. We see those things like Drina was talking about, kids that can't handle walking through a noisy hallway. We see some of those social things because, quite frankly, you know, a group of 8-year-olds could be a little irritating to me. And I'm going to guess if your nervous system is completely freaked out and now I have to be with 108-year-olds all day long, there is a point where that just is completely overloaded. But in my mind, these two things are exactly the same thing. And they manifest sometimes very loudly and sometimes very quietly, I think, depending on who we're dealing with. And we've seen both of them. The sensory are interesting things to deal with as a chiropractor. Most sensory kids do not like to be touched. Most autistic kids do not like to be touched. So we always have an interesting challenge of how in the world are we going to do that? I had that question earlier tonight. What do you do with a sensory kid who won't, there's sensory kids who don't even want to be hugged by their own parents. So we actually have to then touch them. We figured out great ways to do that. And the basics of that are we work at their pace. So when is that my last? Nothing. I thought I had one more slide. I think I'm still. We go back one. So here's what we see. The kids that we deal with, when we make an adjustment, we're actually able to calm their nervous system back down. So we take all of those layers of stresses that they've had, and we're actually able to remove those so that their nervous system isn't either totally shut down, right, in that underreaction, or it isn't totally on red alert, so that it's able to do that. The things that we see, and it's our parents that do that, right? We're back to, in my mind, the parents are the heroes, so they come to me and say things that I didn't even know. We had a little guy that I had no idea. His sensory issues were through the roof, but Grandma got him ready for school every day. So they took an hour and a half getting ready for school every day because putting clothes on was an event. What he really wanted to do was wear his pajamas every day because he could wear his pajamas loose enough that they didn't irritate him. But for some reason, Mom and Grandma had decided that he needed to wear jeans and button-up shirts to school. So it was taking them an hour and a half to get him dressed because it was just so irritating. About a month into adjusting him, Grandma brought him in and she said, "We got dressed in 5 minutes today." You know, it's those little things that you don't think too much about. I told you about Brian and Josh earlier. When Brian had been seeing me for about a year, we had a conversation about school. And I think if you're not inside these kids' heads, we don't really understand what they go through day in and day out to try to be in a learning environment. Most of them are just really great kids that want to do it right, that just, it's hard. So he and I were talking, and he said school's just better. And, you know, for a boy that was pretty descriptive to start with. But I said, can you tell me more, like, what makes it better? And he went like this. He said, when I used to go to school, it felt like this all the time. No matter what was happening, it just felt like this. And he said, now it feels like this. And I remember having a light bulb moment of, oh, that works for me. That totally explains to me what everyone around you has seen happen with you. Now that, you know, you're able to sit in class and you're not, you know, wandering around the classroom trying to get stimulation, and you're not completely shutting down, which I would shut down too if my life were like this sometimes, right? And it would be very hard for me to read or do any of the things I need to do. But he said, now it's just like this, and it's nice and calm. And he could feel that difference in his body and in his nervous system. It was by far the best description that I've ever had. But we just see that over and over and over in the kids that we take care of. We love them. When you're here, you will see some of them. They are sometimes having challenging days. We're taking care of a little autistic guy now that spends most of his day screaming and throwing things on the ground. He will now lay down and get an adjustment, and last Friday he actually giggled through his adjustment, which was, we went from screaming through an adjustment, because we scream all the time, to actually, you could see, he did what I call the lean in, which is when we adjust them, they start to lean back into us, like they know that there's a good thing there. So give those kids some grace, give those mamas some grace, because I'm going to tell you what, those ladies are, the things that they do, the dads too, but the mamas really just take the brunt of that emotion. And sometimes it's really, really hard for them even to come into an environment like this, which I have assured them that you are all safe and that none of you are judging them, but just sometimes to get that little reassurance back that we see what they're doing and that we know that it's hard, and that we're supporting them through that. So we just want to close. Drina said it, but she is just a godsend. Drina has agreed. She wants no money for anything. What she really came to us and said is that she wants to help our families. So any questions that you have, she's available, and we have her information. What she really wants to be able to do is take all of your testing and all of your stuff that you have and look at it and just say, this is what I would do next. And she's willing to do that on the phone, or, well, they're actually headed to Florida, so it will be on the phone. Her and her husband are headed to Florida, so please pick her brain. She knows just more than I will ever know about any of that. Carrie's also willing to do, she's going to do a 25-minute consultation, so if you have specific questions about your kids, I know some of you have already had those consultations for yourself, but if you have specific questions about things that you want to figure out, we talked earlier about healthy lunches or specific things with food allergies with your kids. Carrie said maybe we will be doing food allergy testing. We will be doing food allergy testing because it's on my list, so I'm going to keep pushing for it. So we will be doing that.